March 1988, show number 6, Chicago Theater. 3,600 people are watching Dean Martin stand motionless at center stage. The orchestra is playing the opening bars of Everybody Loves Somebody, but Dean isn't singing. He's staring at the exit sign glowing red in the darkness. His tuxedo hangs loose on his frame. His eyes are empty. Frank Sinatra is watching from the wings, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. Something is terribly wrong. Dean turns to the band, makes a cutting motion across his throat, and says the 5 words that would end an era forever. "I want to go home." He walked off that stage. He never came back. And in that moment, Frank Sinatra realized he had lost his best friend. Not to death, but to something far more terrifying. He had lost him to grief. To understand the magnitude of what happened that night in Chicago, you have to understand what Frank Sinatra was trying to save. He wasn't just organizing a concert tour, he was trying to resurrect a dead man. 1 year earlier, on March 21st, 1987, Dean Martin's world had ended. His son, Dean Paul Martin, Dino Jr., the golden boy, the fighter pilot, the pride of his life, had crashed his F-4 Phantom jet into the side of San Gorgonio Mountain during a snowstorm. He was 35 years old. He died instantly. Dean Martin didn't just lose a son that day. He lost the only reason he had to keep breathing. For the next several months, Dean became a ghost. He stopped performing. He stopped recording. He stopped leaving his house. He would sit in his darkened living room, watching old home videos of Dino on a loop, the curtains drawn against a world that no longer made sense. Friends who visited described walking into a tomb. The king of cool had become a statue of grief, frozen in time, waiting to die. Frank Sinatra watched this from a distance, and it was killing him. Frank had known Dean for over 40 years. They had built empires together. They had laughed together, fought together, conquered Hollywood together. Dean was more than a friend. He was Frank's right arm, his anchor, the only man in the world who could make the chairman of the board feel like a regular guy from Hoboken. Frank couldn't accept that Dean was gone. Not physically, Dean was still alive, but the man Frank loved, the man who could light up any room with that sleepy smile and that effortless charm, that man had died on a mountain in California alongside his son. So Frank hatched a plan, a desperate, foolish, beautiful plan born out of love and denial. He would put the band back together. He would drag Dean out of his crypt and back into the spotlight. He would remind him what it felt like to be Dean Martin. But can you save a man who doesn't want to be saved? Can you bring back someone who has already decided to die? Christmas 1987, Chasen's restaurant, Beverly Hills. The flashbulbs were blinding. Reporters were packed shoulder to shoulder, notebooks ready, microphones extended like weapons. At the center table sat 3 men in tuxedos, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and Dean Martin. They were announcing the Together Again tour. 29 cities, 40 performances, 3 legends reuniting for the first time in 2 decades. The Rat Pack was back. The press went insane. Tickets sold out within hours. The world was hungry for nostalgia, desperate for a glimpse of the golden age when these 3 men had owned Las Vegas. When the Sands Hotel marquee would simply read, Dean Martin, maybe Frank, maybe Sammy, and people would fly in from around the globe just to breathe the same air. But if you looked closely at that press conference, you could see the cracks. Frank, at 72, was still electric. His eyes were sharp. His voice commanded the room. He was selling the dream with everything he had. Sammy, at 62, was thinner than he should have been. He would be diagnosed with throat cancer within 2 years. But his energy was boundless. He was grateful to be there. He needed the money, and he needed his friends. And then there was Dean. Dean Martin sat at that table like a mannequin. He smiled when the cameras clicked, but the smile never reached his eyes. He answered questions in monosyllables. He looked like a man attending his own funeral. Reporters noticed. They wrote about it. Dean Martin seemed distant, one article said, like he'd rather be anywhere else. They had no idea how right they were. Behind closed doors, Dean had tried to refuse the tour. He told Frank he wasn't ready. He told him the stages were too big. Dean was used to intimate Vegas showrooms, not 15,000-seat arenas. He told him he didn't have it in him anymore, but Frank wouldn't listen. "I think it would be great for Dean," Frank told Sammy privately. "Get him out. For that alone, it would be worth doing." Frank believed he could save his friend through sheer force of will. He believed that once Dean stepped back under those lights, once he heard the roar of the crowd, the old magic would return. The grief would lift. The Dean Martin the world knew and loved would come back to life. It was the kind of faith that only a best friend could have, and it was about to be shattered. March 13th, 1988, Oakland Alameda County Coliseum Arena. Opening night, the atmosphere was electric. 14,500 people had packed into the arena, dressed in their finest, gold chains glinting, diamonds sparkling, the sweet smell of expensive perfume mixing with cigarette smoke. This wasn't just a concert, it was a pilgrimage. They had come to worship at the altar of cool. Sammy opened the show. He was magnificent, dancing, singing, doing impressions, working the crowd into a frenzy. When he finished with "I've Gotta Be Me," the standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Then it was Dean's turn. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Martin." The crowd erupted. The orchestra launched into "That's Amore," and Dean Martin walked onto the stage. But something was wrong. He moved slowly, shuffling instead of gliding. His tuxedo seemed to swallow him. He had lost weight, too much weight. When he reached the microphone, he squinted at the crowd like he was trying to remember where he was. "How long have I been on?" Dean mumbled into the mic. It was his old joke, the one that always killed, but this time, there was no twinkle in his eye. This time, it sounded like a genuine question. He started singing, but his timing was off. He forgot lyrics. He stared at the teleprompter with visible confusion. At one point, he took a drag from his cigarette and flicked it, still lit, into the front rows of the audience. The crowd laughed nervously. They wanted to believe it was part of the act. Dean Martin, the king of the drunk routine, the man who made stumbling look like an art form. But this wasn't an act. This was a man who had run out of reasons to pretend. Frank watched from the wings, his face a mask of stone. Inside, he was screaming. When all three took the stage together for the finale, the old chemistry flickered briefly. There were jokes, some good-natured ribbing, a few moments where you could almost see the ghosts of the young men they used to be. But Dean was checked out. He stood between Frank and Sammy like a cardboard cutout, going through the motions, counting the minutes until he could escape. After the show, in the dressing room, Frank exploded. "What the hell was that?" Frank shouted, slamming his fist on the makeup table. "You're embarrassing yourself out there. You're embarrassing us." Dean didn't yell back. He didn't defend himself. He just sat in front of the mirror, still in his tuxedo, staring at his own reflection like he didn't recognize the man staring back. "I'm tired, Frank," Dean said quietly. "I'm just tired." There are different versions of what happened next. Some say Frank threw a plate of spaghetti at Dean's head in a fit of rage. Some say he stormed out and didn't speak to Dean for days. What's certain is that the tension between them was becoming unbearable. The tour moved to Vancouver. Dean forgot the words to "That's Amore," the song he had sung 10,000 times. Then Seattle. He walked off stage during the finale, leaving Frank and Sammy to cover for him. Then Chicago. Each night, Dean seemed a little more distant, a little more lost. He was physically present, but spiritually, he was back in that darkened living room in Beverly Hills, watching videos of his dead son. The audiences didn't know it, but they were watching a man disappear in slow motion. What do you do when your best friend is drowning and he won't grab the rope? Frank tried everything. He cajoled, he threatened, he begged. He pulled Dean aside before every show and gave him pep talks. "Come on, Pally," Frank would say, gripping Dean's shoulders. "One more night. Do it for me. Do it for the fans." Dean would nod. He would walk out on stage, and he would disappear into himself all over again. March 1988, Chicago Theater, show number 5 or 6, depending on who you ask. History gets fuzzy when hearts are breaking. The Chicago Theater was a palace. 3,600 red velvet seats, a ceiling painted like a Baroque cathedral, gilded everything. It was the kind of venue where legends performed, and tonight, a legend was about to die. Dean walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He was wearing the same tuxedo he'd worn every night. He looked thinner than he had in Oakland. His skin had a grayish pallor under the lights. The orchestra began playing. Dean stood at the microphone, and then, nothing. He didn't sing, he didn't speak, he just stood there, swaying slightly, staring out at the darkness beyond the footlights. The audience shifted uncomfortably. The orchestra vamped, repeating the intro, waiting for their cue. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, an eternity. Finally, Dean leaned into the microphone. "You know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've been doing this for a long time." The audience cheered, thinking this was the start of a bit. "A long time," Dean repeated. He looked down at his shoes. "And I'm tired." The cheering faded into uncertain murmurs. Dean looked toward the wings. Frank was standing there, arms crossed, face unreadable. Sammy was beside him, worry etched into every line of his face. Dean turned back to the audience. He tried to smile, that $1,000,000 smile that had launched 1,000 ships. But it came out wrong. It came out sad. "I want to go home," Dean said. He set the microphone down on the piano. He turned his back on the audience, and he walked off the stage. The orchestra fell silent. The crowd sat in stunned disbelief. Some people started clapping, thinking it was an intermission. Others just stared at the empty spotlight, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Backstage, chaos erupted. "Dean!" Frank shouted, chasing after him. "Dean, get back out there. The show isn't over." But Dean kept walking, down the corridor, past the dressing rooms, toward the exit. "Dean, stop!" Frank grabbed his arm, spinning him around. For a moment, they stood face to face. Two old men who had once been young together, who had conquered the world together, who had believed they were immortal. Dean's eyes were wet. Frank had never seen Dean Martin cry, not once in 40 years. "I can't do this anymore, Frank," Dean said. His voice cracked. "Every time I'm on that stage, I think about him. I think about Dino. I think about how he should be here, how he should be the one performing, not me." Frank's grip loosened. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something far worse, understanding. "I can't pretend to be happy," Dean whispered. "I'm sorry. I know you did this for me. I know you were trying to help, but I'm broken, Frank. And no spotlight is going to fix that." Dean pulled away. He walked toward the exit door. "Dean," Frank called out. His voice was different now, softer, desperate. "Dean, please, don't leave. I need you." Dean stopped. He didn't turn around. He stood with his hand on the door handle, his back to his best friend. "I love you, Frank," Dean said, "but I'm already gone." He pushed through the door and disappeared into the Chicago night. Frank Sinatra stood alone in that corridor for a long time. The sounds of confusion from the auditorium filtered through the walls, the stage manager making announcements, the audience murmuring, the shuffle of thousands of people being told the show was canceled. But Frank didn't hear any of it. He was staring at the door Dean had walked through, and he was having a realization that would haunt him for the rest of his life. How do you accept that love isn't enough? How do you live with the knowledge that you couldn't save the person who mattered most? He had been wrong. All this time, Frank had believed he could save Dean. He had believed in the power of music, of friendship, of the stage. He had believed that Dean just needed a push, just needed to remember who he was. But Dean knew exactly who he was. He was a father who had lost his son, and no amount of applause, no amount of money, no amount of love from 14,500 screaming fans could bring his boy back. Frank had tried to resurrect Dean Martin the performer, but Dean Martin the performer had been a mask, a beautiful, charming, effortless mask that Dean had worn for 40 years. And when Dino died, the man behind the mask had died too. What was left was just grief, wearing a tuxedo. Sammy found Frank still standing in the corridor an hour later. "What do we do?" Sammy asked quietly. Frank didn't answer right away. He pulled out a cigarette, lit it with shaking hands, and took a long drag. "We finished the tour," Frank said finally. "We find someone else." "And Dean?" Frank looked at Sammy, and for the first time in perhaps his entire life, Frank Sinatra looked old. Not powerful, not commanding, just old and tired and heartbroken. "Dean's gone," Frank said. "The real Dean. He's been gone since that plane crashed. I was just too stubborn to see it." He took another drag. "I thought I could bring him back. I thought if I loved him hard enough, it would be enough." His voice broke on the last word. "It wasn't enough, Sammy. Nothing's going to be enough. We lost him. We lost him a year ago, and I've been chasing a ghost." The tour continued without Dean Martin. Liza Minnelli stepped in, Judy Garland's daughter, a perfect choice in some ways, a devastating reminder of what was lost in others. The renamed Ultimate Event Tour was a success by all commercial metrics. Sold-out shows, standing ovations, reviews praised Sinatra and Davis for their professionalism, for carrying on. But everyone noticed. The reviews all mentioned the same thing. There was something missing, a spark, a chemistry, the magic that could only exist when those three men were together. Dean Martin went home to Beverly Hills. He returned to his routine of solitude, the darkened living room, the old videos, the silence. He would venture out occasionally to his favorite Italian restaurant, La Familia, where he would sit alone at the same table every night, eating clams casino, the salty brine dripping down the same light blue shirt he always wore. He barely tasted the food. He was just going through the motions of being alive. Sometimes, the restaurant staff would set a place setting across from him, an empty chair. Some said he was waiting for Frank. Others said he was waiting for someone who would never come. Frank tried to reach out. He called. He sent messages. He invited Dean to his home. But something had broken between them that night in Chicago. Not their friendship, but their ability to pretend. They had both seen too much truth. They would reunite one final time, November 13th, 1989, at a star-studded gala tribute to Sammy Davis Jr., who was dying of throat cancer. The photographs from that night show three old men, arms around each other, smiling for the cameras. But look closely, look at their eyes. You can see it, the weight of everything they had lost, everything they would never get back. Sammy died 7 months later, in May 1990. Dean held on for 5 more years. He died on Christmas Day, 1995. The official cause was acute respiratory failure, but everyone who knew him understood the truth. Dean Martin died of a broken heart. He just took 8 years to stop breathing. When Frank got the news, he was devastated. He issued a statement that was uncharacteristically brief. "Dean was my brother, not by blood, but by choice." Frank Sinatra outlived Dean by 3 years. In his final days, lost in the fog of dementia, he would sometimes call out for people who weren't there. "Where's Dino?" he would ask his nurses. "Is Dino coming over? We need to talk." Maybe, in some kinder universe, they did talk. Maybe they're still talking, Frank and Dean and Sammy, together again on some celestial stage, doing the bits they used to do at the Sands, making the angels laugh. But in this universe, the Together Again tour was the end. The real end, not the end of the Rat Pack. That had ended years earlier. It was the end of Frank Sinatra's belief that love could conquer grief. It was the end of the fantasy that the good times could last forever. We all have friends we've tried to save. We've all stood helplessly by while someone we love drowns in their own pain. We've all had that moment of terrible clarity when we realize that loving someone isn't always enough. Frank Sinatra was the most powerful entertainer of the 20th century. He could snap his fingers and presidents would jump. He could make a phone call and careers would end. But he couldn't save his best friend from grief. And that powerlessness broke something in him that never healed. The night Dean Martin walked off that stage in Chicago, he wasn't abandoning his fans, or his friends, or his career. He was finally being honest. He was admitting what everyone had been too afraid to say, that some wounds don't heal, that some losses are too great, that sometimes going home is the bravest thing a person can do. Dean Martin spent 40 years making the world laugh. In the end, the greatest gift he gave us wasn't his music, or his movies, or his charm. It was the reminder that behind every mask, there's a human being. And human beings break. This is Dean Martin, The Untold Legacy. If you've ever lost someone you couldn't save, this story was for you. Hit that like button if it moved you. Share it with the friend who needs to hear that it's okay to not be okay. And make sure you're subscribed, because in our next video, we're going to explore the final mystery. The empty chair Dean kept at his restaurant table for 8 years, and the heartbreaking reason behind it. Until then, keep swinging, Pally, and hold your friends close while you still can.